Hello everybody and welcome. It's morning here and I'm having my coffee and taking a look at what has been filed recently in the income store cases. I hope everybody out there is doing well, is healthy and staying safe. I've received several messages in the last couple of weeks asking me to take a look at what was recently filed. And when I say recently, I mean in the last couple of weeks. Today's date is April 8th. And honestly, I haven't been checking Pacer regularly for updates because I saw when all of this coronavirus stuff blew up that the federal courts had entered some orders basically chilling all the litigation out and pushing off hearings. So I honestly wasn't expecting anything of note to really be filed or anything really interesting to happen. So those of you who messaged me or left comments in videos, I want to say thank you because I did go over there today and take a look at what has been filed, and I found it to be really interesting and worth putting it out there for other people to know about and to hear. If anything, if this inspires you to actually go and take a look at the pleadings and read them yourself, I feel like I will have done my job. So really quickly, before we dive into documents, I just want to give you a quick sort of procedural update on where things are. What you see on the screen right here is actually the history report in Pacer from the SEC case against Today's Growth Consultants and Ken. And what you will see is just timing of what has been filed and when. And right now it looks like the attorneys and the parties are still filing pleadings associated with the plan for distribution and also the proposed distribution of payment to the receiver. Of specific note is that there is now a hearing set for April 23rd, and perhaps after that date we'll have some sort of clarity on what is going to happen next as far as the case and also with the websites. Now, if you are out there and watching this and you are a website owner or a website partner, I'd really like to know if you have gotten your property back. I've talked to a couple people in past weeks who were expecting for things to happen shortly, but given the status of the pleadings, it would surprise me that if people were actually receiving their websites. The next case I just want to touch on briefly is the criminal case against Ken Courtright. This was filed back in February, and I remember at the time I made a video about it, sort of questioning why it is that the government decided to move forward at that time, especially since the case hasn't really been pushed forward in any significant way since then. Obviously, with the federal court's orders about the coronavirus and case management, don't expect anything to happen to this case anytime soon. And probably the reason that the government moved forward with this case was to give the people who were potentially harmed or potentially lost a lot of money in this debacle an easier way to get tax benefits associated with the issue. The next case is the class action, which was filed in February and really has made no appreciable progress in the court system. It doesn't mean that the parties aren't talking behind the scenes. In federal court, there is a sort of I don't want to say expedited, but discovery, meaning the exchange of evidence and documents. The court manages this, I would say, fairly closely and has a pretty tight schedule. So I'm assuming that's going on behind the scenes, but there have been no other real pleadings to report on that have been filed thus far. And again, like the other cases, I would assume that anything of note that would happen is not going to happen anytime soon because of case management orders associated with the pandemic. The things that I want to touch on today and take a look at more in depth are Courtright's objection to the receiver's claim administration process. I think there's some really interesting nuggets in here. Not so much about, what is happening, but it does give us some insight into what is going on. And I also think exhibits A through F are pretty interesting and worth checking out if you have the time. And again, if you're wondering where I found this stuff, you can see up there on the screen. It's at the incomestorereceivership.com website. It was the website set up by the receiver. And I won't say that all of the information associated with the case is on this website. It is a good place to get started. All right, so let's talk about Ken Courtright's combined objection to the claim and administration process, the plan, and the request for payment. What's interesting about this is that while there's some specific responses by the defendant, it honestly feels a little bit like some reputation management, almost like a distraction. Smoke and mirrors, smoke and mirrors. Let's focus on this and forget about this other huge thing that is over here. And I get it, right? The initial pleadings were really bad personally for Ken Courtright and his company. If you read those and nothing else, it would be really hard to be pissed off, not to be pissed off. This response and objection uses the words bias a lot. Like the receiver and the attorneys are biased against him. I'm not going to say that he's wrong. It's pretty clear that they think he's done something really wrong and really bad and are treating him as such. And he's coming out swinging. He says the receiver has demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of TGC's assets and those of the site owners. I think the parties at this point disagree about what constitutes a revenue generating website. And if it is true that there are 1,000 revenue generating websites, it still doesn't mean that TGC was is profitable and not what the receiver and the SEC are calling it. They think it's a Ponzi scheme. I'm not an expert, right? In the last couple of years, I've started building websites and I'm managing my own websites. I don't do operation for anyone else. Right now is a really strange and tough time to be a website owner. This would be an incredibly difficult time given what is going on around the world to have no idea what you're doing. Traffic is going up for some. Traffic is going down for some. Revenues are going up for a few. Revenues are going down for many. Websites that are poised to take advantage of what is going on in the world may be doing excellently right now. In 2019 and in the first few months of 2020, we have seen tons of fluctuation in traffic. And not just because of what is going on in the world, but also what is going on at Google. Is he wrong if he says that the receiver doesn't have the expertise to control and manage the business? He might not be wrong, but is that potentially relevant to the receiver's plan to try and get websites into the hands of the owners? This seems like one of those smoke and mirrors things, like he's been wanting to say for weeks or months that the receiver doesn't know what the team is doing, and this is a public place to say that. In this part of the argument, the defendant refers to an offer that it was apparently made by a third party for $22 million. Well, between $20 and $22 million, not a firm offer. And that was attached as an exhibit. You can see that it's dated March 17, which again, I will note was prior to what we were seeing now around the world about the whole pandemic. And I have to wonder, as the result of the pandemic, whether this offer stands, whether this individual, this group would still be interested in moving forward with the purchase of anything from the income store. So what this is, it looks like something created on a Word document or Google Docs. There's no header other than RR Financial and an address. It's not even on official paper. I mean, I assume this is a legit offer. I assume this is a legit person because it would be crazy to file something with the court with an actual phone number and an email address that could be followed up on. But to submit an LOE for an asset that you value somewhere in the range of $20 to $22 million, I think you'll find this pretty interesting because the offer is contingent on a whole bunch of things that I am certain the receiver has no interest in complying with. One, that Ken Courtright stay involved and manage the portfolio as CSO, which I assume is Chief Security Officer. That Ken Courtright be able to go and bring back former employees and consultants. That specifically one individual or one group, the Ray Christensen Trust, to receive a huge payment, $2.5 million, which would probably leave lots of other investors high and dry, have the receiver completely stop work immediately on everything. So they'll end all of the performance agreements. And they don't want to talk at all to site owners. Some people's ears might perk up with the whole $22 million. I mean, yeah, $22 million is a lot of money, but I have a lot of questions about this. And honestly, even if the receiver were interested in this offer, I'm honestly not sure that it could go forward. One, I'm not even sure what this group would be buying. Because let's accept that TGC manages 1,000 revenue generating websites. Technically, the company only supposedly owns a fraction of those. $22 million. I mean, they can't possibly be buying websites that don't belong to the company. And if the majority of the websites that are actually earning something go to the site owners, is there really something worth $22 million left? I mean, for so many reasons, I think this offer is going nowhere. And it seems more of a distraction, more of reputation management than it does an actual viable offer to resolve what's going on right now. This offer will drop approximately $4 million per month over the next 3 months. So they're trying to create some artificial hurry up and let's get on it. It's like the counter to the SEC's slaying of Ken Courtright's reputation. Just that way the income store can come back and say, oh, well, we got an offer of $20 million. And the receiver just went, meh. I think including this in the pleadings was meant to be a direct communication with the site partners that the defendant couldn't accomplish in any other way. They didn't have to include this letter. And honestly, it's not really that relevant. They just want the site partners to know that there's someone out there apparently who wants to give the income store apparently $20 million and have Ken Courtright run it. Apparently, these people are not convinced that it's a Ponzi scheme, and they're trying to influence the site partners to feel the same way. They're trying to build confidence again in Ken Courtright with some built-in FOMO. This whole thing where the offer is going to drop $4 million a month over the next 3 months, I cannot possibly imagine how that would even work. There's no way anybody's going to want to hurry things up in a purchase worth $20 million when there are $90 million of liabilities out there. Obviously, these individuals are working very closely together if they are interested in having Ken take over management of all of the assets assets. If I was the government, I think I would definitely be issuing a subpoena to a deposition to Robert Monaco, and I would be soliciting communications between Ken Courtright and Robert Monaco. I'd be really curious to see what's in there. Oh, lawyers. The receiver's conclusion that the websites and TCG as a whole are of minimal value shows her fundamental misunderstanding of the operation and is directly contradicted by the third party's recognition of at least $22 million in value. $22 million in value, and they couldn't be bothered to put the offer on a letterhead? Just because I say something is worth that doesn't make it so. These people, if they're legit serious about paying $22 million, are going to want to see everything. They're going to want to see all the books. They're going to want to know what it is they're getting into. It's just so hard for me to see how anybody is going to want to throw $20 million, $22 million in the pot on this, and how there would be anything worth $22 million after the site partners who have earning sites get their sites. I mean, and the objection goes on to say that the site partners have always maintained full ownership of their respective websites. So if the site partners own everything, with the exception of the websites that are owned directly by Income Store and the Courtrights, what's really left worth $22 million? I don't understand. Seriously, if an investment group has $20 million liquid, why throw it at the Income Store? Why not hire someone who isn't completely tainted by a giant lawsuit and have them go spend your $20 million on some other assets? There are millions of websites out there, and maybe not millions that are earning lots of money. This just doesn't make sense as an investment. They go on to argue about the assigning the websites versus ownership. I mean, practically, the receiver is trying to get the websites to the owners. This is just semantics talking about language. Again, smoke and mirrors, let's focus on this thing over here. Forget this $90 million hole over here. The section that he talks about the allowed claim is restrictive and arbitrary, and I agree with that, and I've said it before, and I will say it again. I don't like the language that talks about which folks are allowed to make a claim and which folks will not. I think it should be determined on a case-by-case basis, and I think everybody who has been potentially hurt by this should have an opportunity to state a claim. And if the receiver doesn't agree, then the court can settle it. The receiver has failed to take steps to maintain the assets of TGC, and her filings reveal a bias against the defendants. Yeah, the receiver thinks they did wrong, and it's pretty clear from all of their filings that they think so. Mr. Courtright has continuously raised concerns about the waste of TGC and site owner assets. And this is an opportunity for the Courtright team to attach their correspondence between the lawyers about management. And again, I think this goes back to reputation recovery, so that the defendants can show how much they care and how much they're actually trying to do to help the site partners. They call out the receiver for adopting the SEC's theory that TGC is a fraud. Can you blame her? One of the things that Courtright wanted was that the receiver post his sworn accounting to her website. And I did note in the beginning that there weren't very many pleadings posted on that website, and that bothered me because I feel like the site partners should have all of the information that's out there and available, and I didn't like that there were only a couple of things cherry-picked to take a look at. And I will say now that defendants accounting is posted, because I do think it's important for the site partners to make their own determination. And how can they do that without all of the facts? I guess if you could call the pleadings facts. The receiver has left damaging assertions uncorrected and displayed in both the court file and on her website. It's true, everything that the receiver has said is out there for the world to see, and a lot of it does not display Ken Courtright or his company in very good light at all. And I'm not going to say that the lawyers went too far, because I don't know what the facts are. I am an armchair warrior, and I am observing this from the outside. But I will say from my experience that it is fairly common practice for lawyers to file pleadings with lots of things in mind. You could think of the pleadings like a chessboard, like chess, right? And what you file are the various moves to help you achieve your goal of winning the game. You can create pressure with your pleadings that may influence the eventual outcome of the case. And it may not necessarily boil up inside the case. It could be external. Did the SEC and the receiver purposefully try to incite the owners against Ken Courtright and to influence them to just be happy with their site and to walk away, giving up claims to potential losses that could number in the hundreds of thousands of dollars? Maybe. I'm not going to say that that wasn't the goal. I'm not going to say that it was the goal, or just turned out to be the natural outcome of the allegations and the information as it comes out and comes to light. I think the site partners are feeling pressure, though, to walk away from damages that they would have the right to pursue against the company and Ken Courtright. One of the emails that was in one of the exhibits notes, there is a great deal of anger among the site owners who entered into agreements with TGC. Yeah, that anger is escalating and being fed by publicly available statements. Yeah. According to the company's own records, more than 10.5 million of company funds were transferred to the benefit of Mr. Courtright. And that's in the air quotes. So I'm not saying that's true. That's just what the pleadings alleged. And I remember when this stuff came out, people were really angry. The defendant's team calls the statement misleading and at worst is outright false. Courtright responds that a bunch of those payments were reimbursements for expenses that Courtright had outlaid using his personal credit cards. These factual type disputes, that's what the court is for. It's not for me to say one way or another what is true. The parties dispute those payments, and ultimately it will be up to the court or a jury, depending upon who hears the case, to decide whether or not those were legit payments. Here's what I think is missing though. If Courtright is going to say that those monies were legitimate reimbursements for expenses, that's all well and great, but where did that money come from? He's going to say that those payments were just fine, there was no wrongdoing there. But if an investor wrote a check and that check got deposited directly into TGC's operating account, and then TGC then wrote checks or made payments to reimburse Ken Courtright directly from investor funds, that's not okay. Before we can say that those payments are good or not good, that is the chain that we need to see. Where did those monies come from? And I don't see anything in the defendant's pleadings that confirm where that money came from. Because ultimately that's the question, right? Did the income store appropriately manage the funds that were deposited with it for the purpose of purchasing or managing or building up websites? The SEC is going to make its allegations and Courtright is entitled to respond to them. I will point out though that in his initial answer, Ken Courtright aggressively and frequently asserted his Fifth Amendment privileges to avoid self-incrimination. And now the lawyers are making lots of statements on his behalf, but likely with his approval. Is this eroding his rights under the Fifth Amendment when your agents are going out and making essentially factual statements on your behalf? Naturally, the receiver fired back. This was filed on the 30th, so just over a week ago. And I have to agree with this introductory statement. It says, the objection expresses a more general objection and frustration with the instant litigation initiated by the SEC rather than specific objections to the motion. And I agree with that. I think they had to file something, but ultimately their objections to the proposed plan of distribution honestly doesn't belong so much to Ken Courtright as it does to the site partners. The site partners are the ones who stand to be impacted the most because at this point they're not taking away things that are owned by Ken Courtright or the company. They're just trying to get the things that they contracted for that they theoretically, as the defendant states, already own, are already entitled to. So his objection, there's not a lot of value to it. Defendant Courtright dedicates a significant portion of the objection to insinuating that the receiver is unqualified. This is the lawyer stuff. I really don't think that's going anywhere. I might not agree with the proposed distribution plan, but looking at the things that the defendant has filed in his pleadings, I am bothered now more than ever that his answer doesn't address and respond to the specific allegations about what he did with the investors' money. When they wrote him a check for $250,000 or $100,000 or $500,000, what did he do with that money? Did he not do what he said he was going to do with it, or did he? Did he do with the money what the SEC alleges he did, or not? The ultimate question, whether or not this was actually a Ponzi scheme, is still out there. This right here, going back to that $20 million offer, the receiver apparently had contact with that individual or the company, and apparently there have been no other communications. So they're not actively negotiating over some sort of payout and resolution. Basically, that's going nowhere. And so to summarize, where is this all at? Well, basically, we're still in a holding pattern as far as I can tell. The court hasn't ruled on the distribution plan, and it probably won't happen for a while. I haven't heard from anybody that they've gotten their sites back, even though there are some folks out there who want them. My guess is that the sites are being hammered by the pandemic just like everyone else, and that revenue is all over the place. Obviously, if there are assets out there that are being managed by the receiver's team, I agree that these assets need some actual real stewardship, some actual real management right now. And in general, especially if they're an e-commerce focused asset. I don't honestly expect to see any major traction on anything anytime soon, but not a lot of progress. So what do I think? Do I think that the receiver is going to get the money paid that she wants to get paid? I do. Do I think the proposed distribution administration process is going to get approved as the receiver has laid out? I do. Unless there are some other really significant objections from the defendant or from other individuals involved, I don't see how any significant changes are going to be made to it. And that's what I got, everybody. Doesn't seem like much because ultimately it's just more of the lawyers going back and forth, and it probably won't won't get resolved until it goes to hearing, which isn't supposed to happen for another couple of weeks. But hopefully by the end of April, we'll at least have some clarity on what is going to happen next. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. We'll see you in the next one.